Hey, this is my philosophy for how to win games. I think that there's a lot of talk about the analysis of the meta. There's going to be a lot of talk about what Pokemon are good and bad. But overall, I think that this is just my guide to how to win Pokemon games, because Pokemon games should just be broken down as simple as that. If you want to know how to win, this is what I think. So the meta of Pokemon and if Pokemon are good and everything else like that, all that stuff, it can't be defined, and you can't even really begin to understand it without really a philosophy. Your idea of what's good and bad in the eyes of the person using the Pokemon. You can call it, if you want to, you can call it strategy. You can call it metavision, but I call it philosophy. If you can call it that if you want to. I generally think it's all the same thing. So you can figure it out however you want. So in order to develop your own philosophy, you're going to need like a mental framework. Um, that's going to help you imagine and categorize the Pokemon in this like pool of Pokemon you're using. The pool of viability is what I'm going to call it, right? It's just whatever tier you're playing in. So why is this mental framework important? Um, it's the same reason as like sight and why that's important as an asset, right? If you don't have a mental framework, it's going to create like dissonance between the understanding of those who like have one and those who don't, right? It's literally the difference between seeing and not seeing, right? You can't. It's like if you try to explain to somebody who's never seen color before what the color blue looks like, you're gonna have a hard time explaining it to them because they just don't get it. And that's I a lot of the time I refer to this as the glass ceiling, right? It's this idea of like when you get offense and defense versus when you don't. In fighting games, a lot of the time it's about like spacing and it's about like defense, right? There's like I used to play Smash for a long time, and something that people used to say is like, when a good player can beat a bad player regardless of matchup. But if that's true, then why do good players still lose to bad matchups? Well, that's just because there's that glass ceiling. There's a ceiling of understanding that you have to get to before those matchups start to matter, because you can beat anybody below that ceiling if they don't understand how to create it, right? And there are flukes, there are people who can get through that ceiling and people who peek through, but overall, it's that pure understanding that's going to get you full way and help you win the games. And that comes with, that mental framework. That comes with being able to explain it. If you can't explain it, you can't do it. So, in order to develop your own, philosophy, um, oh, actually, I already just went through that. It's okay. I'm going to cut that. Um, so, um, going back to those who see and don't see, um, I'm going to use a metaphor a lot of the time. You guys are going to see me use a lot of these metaphors to make a point. And the reason I do that is because I think that people don't understand concepts. They're going to understand the humanity behind them and the experience behind them. So you could say a mental framework is just like a metaphor for understanding Pokemon, because you're going to understand the thing that you're talking about better than you're going to understand Pokemon, right? Because if you don't understand Pokemon, it's like you don't see, right? But you might understand something like chess, right? And if you can do something like that, and if you can understand that chess, then and someone explains this Pokemon is like chess because of this, then that's how you understand it. Like if you have a hard time understanding life, and someone says life is like a box of chocolates, well, I understand a box of chocolates, so that helps me understand a bit about life. There you go. So the best way to then begin forming your vision of the game is to start with things that you believe, that you know, or things that you understand, right? After all, you can't really like run if you can't walk. So you're gonna have to learn how to walk first, and you know how to do that, right? But you need to learn how to like do the other thing. So let's move forward from that. So a common framework people use is chess. Like I said, it's really easy, and people call back to it all the time, right? And chess is broken down to how can you effectively capture the opponent's king without losing your own, right? And that then comes into play here in like terms of defending each piece to do that, right? And you can make that analogy with Pokemon, defending all your pieces to capture your opponent's king, aka winning, right? Um, Another common idea that is especially prevalent with Pokemon is to compare the meta to the environment of animals in the world, and where like and in the the animal of like the animal kingdom, the strongest are going to procreate, and in this case, you're going to think about like that rising in usage, right? That Pokemon's going to be used more often. It's going to show up more often. In the same way, if an animal procreates, it's going to show up more often, and the weak are going to cull out, right? They're not going to be used as often because they're not going to show up, right? Um, so, with all that being said, it doesn't matter how you view the game, because that's going to be partial to you. But what matters is going to be like that the fact that you have one, and the fact that you're willing to change it over time to better encapsulate how you view the game. Because how you view is going to change it over time. So you should never, put yourself in a box. You should just these use these experiences and these analogies as helpful tips to remember, right? So the framework that I'm gonna go over is one that makes sense to me. It's the reason why I have Cinderace showing up a lot on these team builders right here. On my editing, I'm probably just gonna use this as my base. So it's gonna be obviously soccer, because that is my original idea, or at least my original idea for how to compare it to Pokemon. Right? That's in my opinion, that's how I imagine my view of Pokemon as I understand it in the way that I understand soccer. And I will say straight up, I'm not a big soccer person, but this is just the way, like, once I understood it in this way, and once I made this comparison, it clicked with me and everything else made sense, right? Um, so, um, as I said, not a soccer player, only been involved with it for the past few years. But the way I understand soccer is the team that scores the most goals in 90 minutes without using their hands wins. If you break it down to its bare essentials, right? And there's a lot of like cool things that can happen if you just leave it at that, right? Like the goalkeeper, a lot of the time people think it needs to stay in the box, but the goalkeeper can score a goal too. That happens sometimes, right? And so when you break it down to its bare essentials, you remember that weird things can happen and are allowed to happen. And there are extra rules involved too, but when you break it down to those bears, that allows you to do those things. So why do people do the things that they do? Why do people decide to take certain actions, right? Well, in my opinion, it boils down to like how the meta forms, right? People will form the meta around what they think is good. But you not being able to see that meta, not having the vision, it doesn't matter to you. None of that matters to you. What matters to you is only what you can see. You need to pull up your vision, but you can only do that by participating. So you should throw away all of that other stuff and break down Pokemon to your bare essentials, right? In the same way that you should break down, like if you can break down soccer to just scoring goals, you can start to understand and build your attack from there, right? How do I score a goal? And if you can't score a goal, and if what you're doing isn't going to lead you or your team to a goal, then it doesn't matter, right? So in Pokemon, this is the way I'm going to understand it. If the goal of the game is to get 6 kills before your opponent, right? Break that down to its very simple basics. Then how can you get kills before your opponent does? And how can you confirm those 6 kills in the most efficient way possible, right? And what I call that is a formula for reproducing kills. And in soccer, you can imagine as a formula for reproducing goals, right? For some people, they have like a certain trick for doing it, right? In Pokemon, you're going to think about that as like, whatever Pokemon you build your team around, whatever that first Pokemon is, that's like the first weapon you're putting on your team. And everything normally builds around that first idea. So whatever your idea is, everything needs to be able to be free flowing from those options, right? So if you're constantly trying to, maximize your kills, then how are you going to go about that thing, right? For me, um, because I'm always going for kills, what matters is being able to reproduce them and being able to confirm every single one, right? And that means having a solid attack. The most important part of Pokemon for me is that if you're not attacking, you're moving backwards, right? If you're not always going for the kill or going for some version of a kill in the future, then you aren't moving forwards. And in chess, there's another great analogy for that, in which case, if you aren't progressing your pawns and moving forward, and taking over the center, right? If you aren't moving towards the center, then you're moving backwards in chess, and you're not gaining any ground. And in that case, if your turn in chess, it's valuable, right? If you have to spend it moving backwards, you're losing something. And in Pokemon, it's the same way. If you're being forced to switch out, if you're forced to take a defensive option like Protect, that's a bad thing. In theory, if you because you could be losing something out of it, right? Your opponent can gain something, and you are always risking something by not taking an offensive option. So Um, and sorry, I wanted to make one more analogy. If you're playing a fighting game, you can imagine that as center control or stage control, right? Always fighting for that stage control and for the general, or like, and for to like get advantage over the neutral. That's another way to imagine it, right? And I'm talking about all these different mental frameworks and metaphors once again because I want as many people as possible to be able to understand what I'm talking about when I talk about this, right? And then but once you find those attacks, right? Because I'm talking about getting kills, but obviously, if Pokemon was just a game about kills, then like the strongest and the fastest would win, and that would be it, right? So why are there things that can like that have tech, right? Why are there things that can move in between and like can exist without just being killbots, right? And that's when I talk about how one Pokemon's attack can be multiplied by another Pokemon in terms of synergy. And this is where you get into the idea that like if a Pokemon can recreate turns and can create opportunities for another Pokemon to attack, more opportunities even, and that attack is solid and can't be deflected by the opponent in a meaningful way, then that means that you have recreated like a scoring opportunity, right? And that is a chemical reaction, if you will, right? I'm also for anybody who watches a lot of anime. Yes, I'm using a lot of blue lock terms. That is the best way to imagine it. And anime watchers, that is another way to imagine yourself getting better at Pokemon. Use what you understand to get better. Um, but as I said, chemical reactions. You can like for instance, Alomola is my favorite example of this. Um, and I call it the Moneyball Pokemon, right? Because it's a Pokemon that a lot of people undervalue because people think that you can just do whatever on it. But it is not a Pokemon that can beat like the whole wide world. It's a Pokemon that can just beat certain important other Pokemon, right? And when you can hardwall something, and when you can Regenerator and Wish Protect out, that just creates an opportunity. It is as like if you like for instance, if you go into Alamomola and you take damage, right? And that damage is not enough to not more than your Regenerator, then the next time you take damage, you're going to be healing almost all of your HP back. And then that means if you flip turn and it's a slow flip turn after your opponent moves, then you will be healing all that damage after they attack you, and it'll be as if they didn't attack you, and then you get free damage with flip turn. And then you get to switch out into something like Cinderace, right? And then Cinderace gets to attack them with its speed and power, and it is as if it was already out in the field, and it was as if Alamomola almost didn't touch, as if you just got a free switch into Cinderace. And that is the power of having a pivot like that. And that is the chemical reaction that Alamomola can have with a Pokemon like Cinderace, or any really offensive threat for that matter. It is the Moneyball Pokemon, because it is always creating turns. In Moneyball, Billy Bean talks about batters that he likes, and this is baseball, by the way, and he says he likes people that get on base. I like Pokemon that get on base. Pokemon that can take a hit and recreate a turn as if it's free, that is getting on base, in my opinion. If I can have a Pokemon that takes 2 hits, or if I have a Pokemon that can attack and take, or that can take an attack and attack back, and then take a second attack and roost and get to full health, it was as if I attacked for nothing. Because I now granted I cost me a roost PP, and I always got to keep that in mind. Nothing in Pokemon is inherently free, but it was almost free. And to my opponent, it might as well have been free. And if my opponent can't do anything about that, that's when it gets scary for them. And that is the best way to maximize your offense and maximize your attack, is to make sure that your attack is as free as possible. And freedom doesn't always mean just be an attacking Pokemon. It means getting damage without having damage returned to you. It means getting ahead in any way, shape, or form. Even if you've only taken over the middle of the board slightly, you have still gained that advantage, and that slight advantage is something that you can wager against your opponent, and that's something that forces them to attack. And when and something that you need to understand about having leverage is that when you are forced to make a play, that is always a downside, because if you aren't forced to make a play, you can make mid-ground plays. And mid-ground plays are generally always the king of the hill, right? So the reason why being able to make um, plays that effectively don't cost you turns is because it's the same as making a mid-ground play, but without losing your advantage state. It's like being a swordy in a fighting game and being able to swipe away your opponent who can't even touch you. They can't even get within your reach of your sword. So they can never attack you because they can't ever get in your reach. And it feels unfair, but they can't get in between your sword swipes. And that is the power of having a defensive neutral. But if you press your advantage too hard, you play too aggressive, then you won't be able to press that advantage. So part of the yin-yang, part of the duality of an attack is understanding that an attack is only as good as the defense. Because a true attack is gaining over the balance, right? It's getting free attacks. The truest version of an attack is a free attack. It's a Pokemon. It's doing more damage than your Pokemon can, and that's why kills are so important. Is because if you get a kill before your opponent attacks you, then they can't attack you back. They can't do anything about it. So having a strong, fast Pokemon that can kill before the other opponent can attack you back is the most efficient way to manage attack or your kills, and the most efficient way to get ahead in the game. And that's why securing them is so important. So I've talked for a while about creating a formula for your kills, about being able to trade 6v6 and so on, about speed and everything else like that. And so the last thing I want to do is to really just like challenge people to make their own mental frameworks. Tell me what they think. Tell me what you think. Tell me, like, literally, you right now, whoever is listening, I want you to think about how you think Pokemon works. Tell me what Pokemon you think are good, and tell me why you think they're good. Because why something is good is more important than just the fact that they're good. And if you can't explain it to me, then I don't believe you outright. That is the way that this is good. That is the way that I work, and that is the way that I'm going to understand Pokemon, and that's the way that you should understand Pokemon, because no one should make you believe something if they don't have logical reason for it, right? So, you in your comments and in the way that you play, and anybody who ever challenges me in Pokemon in the future, I want you to challenge me with your logic and tell me what's good and why, and tell me that thing. I'll tell you straight up, I'm going to finish out with Cinderace is amazing because even though Pyro Ball and High Jump Kick have the chance to miss, they're just pure attacks. There are very few Pokemon that can truly take a Pyro Ball or a High Jump Kick, and U-Turn is able to deal damage to a lot of different Pokemon, and even Oko Pokemon that are weak to it. Libero making that U-Turn stab makes it so that that almost kill turns into a kill a lot of the time, especially on low health Pokemon. And so Cinderace can threaten kills with U-Turn, can threaten kills with Pyro Ball and High Jump Kick to threaten a late game kill scenario where Cinderace just sweeps with its speed. It has Sucker Punch to sweep with its power, in addition to Pyro Ball and High Jump Kick. So it has 3 different ways to pressure the opponent, both with leveraging kills with U-Turn, leveraging a threatening sweep with power with Sucker Punch and Pyro Ball, High Jump Kick, and threatening with just speed with Pyro Ball, High Jump Kick, etc. So Cinderace is always a killing threat. And on top of that, it has ways to leverage its turn by leveraging its power to force the opponent to make a defensive play, and then making a mid-ground prediction of hitting something like Court Change in order to give your team back. Cinderace is a Pokemon that creates opportunities over and over and over and over again for its team, and that is why it is my favorite Pokemon. And it does it in everything it does, even in Pokemon Unite. In Pokemon Unite, it is a Pokemon that just creates opportunities for its team by attacking and attacking and attacking, and it is a pure offense that just outranges everything. And if you play safe, it will never not be good, and that is the true Cinderace way. So, thank you, and tell me what you think.